Oh, we're live on this Black Friday morning. I'm really curious as to who is awake and out there getting the deals and who has moved on from that kind of situation and just waits for Cyber Monday. I'm over here in my husband's office because I like the lighting in here, y'all. Let me know if you like the lighting. This lighting better than what I've been doing. Y'all, let me know if you like the lighting. All right. We do have, bear with me, y'all. I'm going to turn this around and adjust the camera so that I'm looking at you. Okay, now okay. How was y'all Thanksgiving? How was your Thanksgiving? Mine was great. All of my kids are here. They weren't all here for Thanksgiving dinner because my son is married now, so he's dancing that dance where you try to figure out what are you going to do. You have two families that love you and want to be with you for Thanksgiving. What are you going to do? How are you going to negotiate that, with your new family, with your wife and whatnot? And so her family is not here in Delaware, but in Pennsylvania. And so thankfully not too far away. And so they came last night and, had part two, round two. And so I'm really happy that all my kids are home. I'm thankful that everyone is doing well and that we're all together again and that God has blessed us with a new addition to our family, my daughter-in-law, Natasha. I don't think my kids really watch my videos. Definitely not my long lives. But I'm very thankful for them. I'm very thankful that God was able to use me, to pour into their lives. I feel like God, I was a vessel. I know this sounds a little cliche, but that's the only way that, I really believe this is the way it really works. Like, I feel like a vessel. I feel like God asked me if he could use me, and I said yes. And so I became a vessel. And I feel like he poured into me, and then I poured into them. And even with all my fumbling and bumbling and weaknesses and struggles, I'm very grateful, for how the Lord has nurtured my family and my kids and my husband, and how he's still with us, how he's still working with us. And so this has been a very happy Thanksgiving for me. I miss my own extended family. I miss celebrating these things with them, but they're all going to be here for Christmas. So I'm excited about that. I'm not a Black Friday person. You will never find me out there in them stores because I do not like long lines. I love people. I don't think I would mind the crowds, but I don't like long lines. I like to try stuff on. I get overwhelmed when too much stuff is presented to me. So I would have really had to do some good research, and been going out there for something specific to make that kind of situation work for me. I think toward the end of the day, when it's all over and the stores have cleared out, I'm the kind of person that might be like, hey, girls, want to go to the stores and do a little bit of shopping when Black Friday, like when most of the people are done, And so for the purpose of deals, I'm not going to be that one that's out there. Okay. So I hope if you are, I hope you're doing well, but you do know more sales are coming. Some people would even argue these are not the best sales of the season. So whatever, whatever. But we are here today because I was reading Psalm 78, and God just kept, saying over and over and over. I just kept hearing over and over and over, I'm for you. I'm for you. I'm for you. I'm for you. And that's why I wanted to come on here and do this live so that I can tell you that in the midst of everything that's going on, okay, in the midst of all the struggle, all the upheaval, some of us have actually lost people. Like I haven't personally lost anybody close to me to this illness that we're dealing with, but I know some people have. I definitely, you know, come into some strong prayer and intercession for other people who had family members, struggling with this in the hospital on the brink of death. And God has blessed, 3 times now, those people that the doctors were saying, this is it, came out strong, completely healed, completely recovered, completely free. And not to say the people that didn't, God loved them any less and God was for them any less, but it was sure encouraging to see the people that God brought out. I said 3, but I think it's 4. I'm thinking of 4 people, that were not close to me personally, but close to somebody I was close to personally. So I became involved in the battle to pray for their lives. Okay. 4 people who the treatment seemed like it was doing more harm than good, but they couldn't survive on their own without, they didn't feel like they could survive on their own without going in for treatment. 4 people who the doctors were saying, prepare yourself. And they came out victorious. And one of them is a young man with a wife who's pregnant, due any day now, you know, and he came out. You know what I'm saying? He's home. He's going to see his wife have that baby. They have 2 young kids. They're going to have their dad. And he's going to be there for the birth, and he's going to be there with his newborn. And his situation was so bad for him. He ended up having a tracheotomy. I mean, it was really bad for him. But God came through, you know. I've just been so encouraged. I'm very thankful this year. And I know that a lot of people had the negative outcome. They lost somebody close to them. And it's been really hard and it's been really devastating. They're struggling with their job situation. They're struggling, or watching someone close to them struggle. Or, a lot of churches have fallen apart because people are divided on how we need to handle this situation. And it's been a really tough couple of years, you know. But reading Psalms 78 made me realize that even though when we look at bad things, because we inherently believe that, bad things should happen to bad people and only good things should happen to good people. And when we see bad things happening to good people, we're just scratching our heads. It really puts us in a vulnerable position. If I can't be good to ensure that only good things happen to me, I'm really out of control. You know what I'm saying? And maybe I thought I was good, but because bad things are happening to me, I must be bad and God is against me. All these bad things that are happening to me mean that God is against me. God is punishing me, or God is judging me and condemning me for something he doesn't like about my life. And we can feel like God is so far away from us. And I think in more modern times, we've moved to this view of God. Like if he's a good God, that means he's not a God that passes judgment on evil. That can't be farther from the truth. But I feel like Psalms 78 reveals another element of this. Psalms 78 doesn't show a God who's just responding to good versus bad, and is very impersonal and disconnected. That's not the kind of God that we see in Psalms 78. In Psalm 78, We see a God that's intimately connected, intimately, reaching out and interacting and responding to the way we respond back to him. You know, God's not, it's hard because we're trying to understand God and describe God based on human terms and how we are. And in some ways we can do that because, we know from Genesis that we are made in God's image. So in some ways we are like God, but in a lot of ways God is not exactly like us. But I think in using this kind of emotional language, what allows us to know is that we're not just, it's not like God is the creator and he made us the way we would take Play-Doh and make figures, and animate them. You know what I'm saying? And we're just his things that he made. And, he doesn't have any kind of emotional connection to us. And, he just manipulates things and he's kind of cold. You know what I'm saying? But God is not like that in the sense that he loves us. He is love, and that he has this emotional connection to us. We can know that just because bad things are happening and things are hard, and there are things we don't understand and can't explain, and I think in the times that we try to explain those things, we explain them badly, and it causes a lot of confusion and distress, and a lot of times it causes people not to be able to trust God and have a relationship with him because we've explained these things badly. God put this on you because he's trying to teach you something. You know what I'm saying? You deserve this. You've gone too far. You know what I'm saying? You can't turn back to God now. You've blasphemed his name and you can't turn back to him because you've gone too far. I think these things are really damaging. And I think the God that comes across very clearly, both Old and New Testament, is a righteous, good, uncompromising God who is merciful, loving, and will exact righteous judgment. But he's always offering you a way of escape. And he's even gone so far to do everything it takes to reconcile himself to you in close relationship, in family relationship. Okay. By doing everything that was necessary, our part and his part. You know what I'm saying? As far as the works go. Okay. But what we need to do is to open ourselves up and welcome that opportunity. Walk through that door. Say yes. You know what I'm saying? Say yes. And then after that, it's all about walking out that relationship. Everything that we need, our purpose, why are we here? What are we doing this for? Our families, everything is in pursuing that close relationship with God. And that's what these lives are all about. Is my active pursuit of God and trying to encourage you to actively pursue God because he promises that if you do that, he's going to open himself up and welcome you in. Okay? And so you guys, let me just read this. And I feel like, a lot of times people have a hard time looking at the children of Israel, right? People have a hard time looking at the children of Israel. I'm looking at my screen. I just wanted to make sure that there was nobody talking or saying anything in the lives. I do like to get my message out. My name is Natasha, by the way. I'm notoriously horrible for introducing myself in my videos. My name is Natasha. Welcome to my channel if you're here for the first time. I tend to just try to just let you know what the Lord is putting on my heart during these lives, but I do want you to know that I'm doing a live so that we can interact. So what I'll do is I'll talk until I feel like I said what I needed to say, and then I'll go back and I'll go through the chat, and there'll be a time where we can talk back and forth. And I in the past, if you go to my first lives that I did about with my morning chills, you'll see that the comments were turned off. But I've had a couple of people approach me privately asking, please please, could you just please turn the comments on? I just would really like the opportunity to not argue back and forth or get into some kind of theological debate, but just have the opportunity to have that conversation about what the Lord is doing as we're sharing about these things. And the back and forth can be edifying. It doesn't have to be confrontational. And honestly, for me, I also didn't know if I would have the time to come back and feel that. But so far, since the comments have been turned on, I really haven't seen much of that. I haven't seen any confrontation, and I haven't seen a whole lot of people sharing, something that they really want to discuss. And so, since I haven't seen it either way, and I really felt like it was the Lord through this person. I now have the comments turned on. But this is just a casual conversation. I've said this over and over. I'm just a regular person. That's the whole point of these lives. I'm just like you. So if I can get into the Lord and he can show me much, he can show you this much too. And so Psalm 78, this is addressing Israel and God's relationship with Israel. And a lot of times we look at Israel and we're like, y'all are so foolish. After all that God did, how could you guys keep messing up like this? But more and more as I read through the Bible, I see I'm the same. I have very similar characteristics as Israel. Okay. And I know that a lot of believers now tend to be careful about how they look at Israel because of Jesus, we have a much better covenant than the covenant that they were working with. They were trying to live out the law, in their own abilities to the best of their abilities, and they had, a sacrificial system that was imperfect and needed to be done over and over and over and over again, and at best it covered their sin. It didn't completely remove their sin. And so, and they always needed somebody between them and God. They couldn't even go, into the Holy of Holies, which is the part of the tabernacle first, and then the temple later when the temple was built, which represented the place where God's presence was. They always had to have somebody between them. There was a curtain between them and that place, and only the high priest could go in, and he could only do it once a year. You know what I'm saying? There were so many barriers, and a lot of believers today, we appreciate the fact that because of what Jesus did, we don't have a lot of those barriers and a lot of those struggles. And what's more, when Jesus ascended back to the Father, he sent Holy Spirit, his spirit, to live in us. So, in a lot of ways, we are the Holy of Holies now. His blood was enough to cleanse us and make us pure enough so that God's presence could actually be with us all of the time. He's actually in us all of the time. But I think it's a mistake to completely ignore Israel and their story, because God specifically decided to tell us this story so that we could understand him and understand ourselves. And when I read about Israel, I see the parallel. I see the similarities. I see the way we struggle in a lot of the same ways. And I also see the way out that God provided for them that they failed to walk through. But it's the same way out that's provided for me that I can choose to walk through. You know what I'm saying? And so this is really Israel, God recounting Israel's story. And to me, it's describing the dance that they do in their relationship with one another. And it's the same dance that we do. Okay. And so I think it will help us to understand, make sense of the things that challenge us so that we can see God the right way and know God's not against you. God is for you, especially if you've chosen him. Okay. Through reading the story of Saul, we saw that God was pursuing Saul, even though Saul wasn't choosing God. And even to his last breath, God was so long suffering with him. He always had the opportunity to repent. He always had the opportunity to turn back. He always had the opportunity to go along with God's plan instead of fighting God's plan with everything that he was worth the way he was doing. So even if you're not submitted to God and you're not pursuing God, God is still for you. You know what I'm saying? As long as you have breath, you can still repent, and you can repent of anything and everything. Jesus's blood covers everything, no matter what you have done. Think of the most horrible thing you could possibly do. You know, Jesus's blood is enough and has covered that. And God has let us know that anything we could do in our own strength would never be enough. Like I was reading a psalm a couple of days ago that was talking about how, you know, we could never purchase somebody's soul that's been condemned, because we just don't, it's worth so much. It would cost so much that no matter what we could do in our own strength, we wouldn't be able to do it. That's why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Only what Jesus did does God consider adequate enough to redeem a soul. And so no matter what you've done, if you choose to repent, God is for you. What's against you is your sin. Your sin is against you, because God is a righteous judge. And he has said that if you sin and you don't repent of the sin, you know, there's justice that will be done. And so in a sense, God can be against you if you choose sin and you don't choose God. But God himself is for you. You have the opportunity to repent. You have the opportunity to turn to God. Okay? And so let's read Psalm 78. It says, Psalm 78 verse 1, this is a contemplation of Asaph. Okay, it says, give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. And so now we get more intimate in verse 9. The children of Ephraim, which is a descendant of Joseph, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, one of the sons of Joseph. So their tribe is, one of them is Ephraim, the other one is Manasseh. Okay, so verse 9. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in his law and forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. Okay, now what are these wonders? Verse 12. Marvelous things he did in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zon. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters stand up like a heap. In the daytime also he led them with the cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink in abundance, like the depths. The depths is like when he split the rocks and the water came out, it was as abundant as if they were drawing water from the sea. The depths is like the sea. Okay. Verse 16. He also brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. So when we have a need and God meets the need, he meets it with fantastic abundance. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that experience will always cause us to know who God is and how he will respond when the next obstacle comes our way. Because look at how they behave in verse 17. It says, but they sinned even more against him, by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Okay, so God provided manna for them as food in the wilderness. It was like these flakes that they could use and turn into cakes, okay, to turn into bread to eat. Okay, and it said it tasted really good. But think about it. It's the same thing that you're eating every day. And the way the manna worked, every day it would fall, and you had a certain amount of time to go out and gather only what you needed for that day for your family. If you gathered more than what you needed, the excess would rot and be wormy and disgusting and be completely useless. So it was a kind of food that you could gather, but you had to trust that you don't have leftovers. Okay. So you had to trust God every day that God would give you this food, because you're in the wilderness where there is no food that you can go and get in your own strength. And God told them that he wanted them to rest from work one day. So on the day before that day, he called that day the Sabbath, he would allow them to gather twice as much manna so that it would last for the day they gathered it and the next day. But that was the only situation where you could gather more than you needed, for that day. But you had to trust God that he would be there to meet your need all of the time. Okay. But another aspect of the manna was, yes, you had to trust God. God proved himself to be faithful for 40 years of doing this every single day. Okay. Because it says they didn't stop receiving the manna until they had actually conquered and gone into the promised land, and then they could just provide for themselves at that point. Okay, once they crossed over into Jericho successfully, the manna stopped. Okay, and so think about that. Every day you can only gather what you need. You got to believe that tomorrow God is gonna give you more. It does taste good, but you're eating the same thing every single day. Okay, and so you start to think back to what it was like back in the day when you didn't have to eat the same thing every day. And you start having cravings. Okay, your body starts craving other stuff. We all know what that feels like when you have food cravings. Okay. And when we read about the story in other parts of the Bible where they describe this experience, we read that it's a strong craving. It's the kind of craving that they couldn't ignore. Okay. And so now, even though it's a miracle that food is coming from heaven that way, and they know that it's God and it's what God provided for them, it was a perfect composition for their nutrition. You know what I'm saying? And everything about it was good, because of these strong cravings, those rose colored glasses that we like to look at the past with. You remember back in the day, yeah, you could eat different things back in the day, but back in the day, stuff was so bad that you cried out to God because you were slaves in Egypt. You cried out to God to rescue you because you were a slave. Okay. But it's so interesting when we move forward in time, when we're not in those difficult circumstances anymore. It's so interesting. The rose colored glasses that we can look back, to the devastating place we were before that was so bad we wanted to get out. We weren't thinking about, oh, but at least I can eat onions. We weren't thinking about that back then. Back then, we were like, I'm a slave. It's terrible. I'm being oppressed. They're killing my children. I have no control over what happens to me. They rape my women. I was a slave. Save me, save me. Now God saved you. And because you're eating this good, wholesome, but boring food every day, now you're bored with it. Okay. You can look back to slavery even and think you were better off then. Okay. You're struggling with this strong craving. You're seeing things that way, but God is walking through the process with you. Okay. He's not deceived. He sees the level of ingratitude that is in you looking back at slavery and some onions and thinking you were better off back then. And for me, as I read through this, I see that there are so many implications for how we can apply this today to our own hearts, to our own, situations, our own walk with God, you know. And so let's continue. It says, verse 19, yes, they spoke against God. They said, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide meat for his people? And so, you guys, it's like, yes, it was a miracle and God did this miraculous thing. But this next miracle, can God do that too? Will he do it? Okay. Verse 20. Verse 21. Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. So God responded in anger to their attitude. Why would he do that? The very fact that he could respond in anger, demonstrates that he's not this cold, distant God that's like, well, they didn't do what I wanted, poof, away with them. He's vested in us. Okay. So it says he was furious. It says, so a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel. Verse 22. Why? Why was he upset? Because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation. Yet and this is, and he's explaining what God has done that should have made them not even have that question. It's interesting because when I read it that way, it makes me realize that I don't think God was upset because they were bored with the manna and wanted to eat something new. I think he was upset because they assessed him as being a kind of God, the kind of stingy God that would only give them manna. And so they didn't even think to just go to God and be like, God, thank you so much for this manna. I'm so thankful for this manna. But God, do you think I could have a little bit of roast duck too? You know what I'm saying? They didn't approach God that way. Instead, they approached God like, he's always giving us this manna. This manna. I'm so sick of this manna. Life was better in Egypt. Why did he bring us out here just to only provide manna? He should have known we wouldn't have wanted just manna. You know what I'm saying? They had that kind of attitude toward God. And God responds to that. Okay? And it says, this is what he had done for them. It says, yet he had commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven, had rained down manna on them to eat, and given them of the bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food. He sent them food to the full. Okay? When God provides, you're full. You're not still hungry afterwards. You know what I'm saying? So verse 26. This is what God's judgment was for them. It says he caused an east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he brought in the south wind. Verse 27. He also rained meat on them like the dust, feathered fowl like the sand of the seas, and he let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwelling. Verse 29. So they ate and were filled, for he gave them their own desire. And so this is interesting because I've been reading so many different accounts of so many different people and their walk with the Lord, and what happens when judgment comes on them. And so many times I see judgment by God rendered this way. His judgment is to give them what they've asked for. Okay. And this makes me really, really careful about consensus and judging whether things are right or wrong, because a lot of people, are in agreement that this is what should happen. Okay. Just because a lot of people want something doesn't mean it's right. And just because the majority is in favor of something doesn't mean it's best. And just because something is allowed to happen doesn't mean that God is supporting it, as in, this is good. Yes, do this. Sometimes it could be, this is what you want. The judgment is, I'm going to give you what you want. Why? So that you can see that what you want is not good like what you thought it was good. And we've experienced that, guys. You know, we didn't want God in our schools. We didn't want God in our government. You know, we took him out. You know what I'm saying? We wanted, you know, to be able to do what was right in our own eyes. And you guys, that seems like a worthy, admirable thing in our culture today, to be able to do what's right in your own eyes. Okay? And to not have anyone judge you or condemn you for the choices that you make. Just the fact that it was right in your own eyes means that it's a good and right thing. Every person should be given the freedom to do what they think is right in their own eyes. The only reason why this is something that's highly valued in our society today is because people do not read the Bible. If you read the Bible, you would know that whenever it says the phrase, and they did what was right in their own eyes, either what comes before that or what comes after that is never good. It's just never good. It's never good. It's always bad. Okay? It's not ever good. It's never good. It's always a complete disaster. Okay? Yet we worship this thing. We worship this thing. Okay? And we pursue this thing. So let's continue. Verse 30. They were not deprived of their craving. You guys, everything that's about to happen to them right now is not going to be good. And it happened because they were not deprived of their craving. Just because you have a strong craving for something, just because you really, 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 really want that thing, and you can't imagine being without that thing. Nowadays, we have come to the place where we believe that if that craving is strong enough, it's cruel to deny that person of that craving. Okay. But in this story, we have evidence that giving into that craving in abundance, in the full, being completely released so that you could enjoy yourself and satisfy that craving to the full. Okay. We have evidence that the outcome of that is not good. It's judgment from God, giving you that thing you think you want, giving you that thing that's right in your own eyes. Often that is judgment from God. But it's a judgment that God is releasing, you know, for justice sake and for righteousness sake, yes, but also so that you will come to see and understand that it's not good. Sometimes you need to deny yourself of this strong craving and not use this need, this craving, this thing you want that you just can't, you know, you can't shut it off. You know what I'm saying? You're craving it, and it's strong. Sometimes you need to deny that and know God, know God's word, know what God says about that thing. And even though you have that sincere craving, you need to be able to deny yourself and say, no, I'm not going to satisfy that. I'm going to deny myself that. Why? Because God says it's bad, so it's bad. It's not bad because the majority thinks it's not good because the majority thinks it's good. It's not good because the craving is too strong and I can't get rid of it myself. Okay? The fact that it's a strong craving that I really want and that I think it's right within my own eyes doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good. And in fact, giving into that is going to cause something bad to happen to me. It's going to be bad. Okay. Instead of giving into that, I'm going to deny myself and I'm going to stand firmly in the trust and confidence that because God said this isn't something I should have, this isn't somewhere I should go, this isn't something I should do, this isn't someone I should be, this isn't who I am. Okay? Because God said it. And I choose to submit myself to that, then I will experience good. You understand? Because let's read what happens to them. It says, so they ate, and verse 29, so they ate and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not deprived of their craving. But while their food was still in their mouths, the wrath of God, which is the judgment of God, came against them and killed, the stoutest of them, and struck down the choice men of Israel. Okay. And even though this judgment came against them, in verse 32, it says, in spite of this, they still sinned and did not believe in his wondrous works. Therefore, their days he consumed in futility. It's pure futility, you guys, to be wandering around for 40 years in the wilderness, getting up every day and doing the work of picking up manna to eat bread, only to go to bed and get up the next day and do the same thing again. Yes, you get to live day by day by day by day, but those people did not belong in the wilderness. I think I've read certain commentaries that have said the journey from Mount Sinai to the promised land should have taken them something like 11 days. Okay. You up in here traveling for 40 years on a journey that should have taken you 11 days. Why? Because you refuse to know God. And because you refuse to know God, you can't know yourself. Okay. So your days are eaten up in futility. Okay. And it says, and their years in fear. And that's something else that I see over and over and over and over again. When God's judgment comes, fear comes. Why? Because perfect love casts out all fear. So if you need to walk without fear, you need to be walking in love, which is in God. So if you don't have God, you have fear. Okay. And so now they're walking in fear. Okay. Verse 34, when he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and sought earnestly for God. Then they remembered that God was their rock and the Most High God, their Redeemer. So thus begins the dance that unfortunately we have with God. The dance where, he did so much for you, but you were ungrateful, or when things got comfortable, you decided to go and do your own thing and leave God, because what do you need God for? Everything is good. So you went off and did your own thing. Okay. Unfortunately, prosperity isn't drawing you back to God. Hardship is what draws you back to God. When you're in a bad situation and things are really bad, that's when you want to turn back to God. Okay. And I think a lot of people can misunderstand this dance when you're reading these scriptures, and you can think, oh, okay. So God uses hardship in order to turn us back to him. So that's God's tool. That's God's weapon arsenal, or this is God's way of winning our hearts. Okay. A lot of us can think that. And I think that's where that doctrine comes to play, that people believe that, well, God put this bad situation on you to teach you something, to draw you back to him. But if you really read these events, what it looks like is actually happening is that God is pursuing you like a lover would pursue you by spending time with you, pouring out gifts on you, blessing you, putting you under his protection. He's pursuing you with prosperity. He's pursuing you by giving you peace on every side. He's pursuing you by fighting for you and showing himself strong, so that you're defeating enemies that are much bigger than you, that there's no way you could defeat those enemies on your own. But this is God's way. Okay. But what happens is when you get everything you need, then you forget God, and all of a sudden you have these strong cravings. You know what I'm saying? You looking back at the past with rose-colored glasses. You looking at the nations around you that don't have God, that you think they're prospering, and you're bored and you're craving that and you forget God. Okay. It's not that God then went and brought something bad so that you could remember God, because you're not with God, because you've walked away from God, because you've forgotten God and you don't have God. You don't have his protection either. You don't have his prosperity either. You don't have, so you have, what you have is fear. What you have is a lack of peace. What you have is you've been delivered into the hands of your enemies, because you weren't free from your enemies because you were able to fight them off in your own strength. You were free from your enemies because you were with God. But because you walked away from God, your enemies have an open door to come in and tear you up, because you don't want God. You don't want God to fight for you. So he's not fighting for you. So you're on your own. And so you're exposed to your enemies. Okay? So it's not that God put these bad things, on you to make you turn back to him per se. Even though when you're reading the language of this text, I do think it can read that way. Okay? But if you really look at what's happening, you will see that what God actually did was try to be in relationship with you. He tried to bless you. You're the one that walked away and did your own thing and left God. But all that prosperity and peace and victory is in God. So you don't have access to that anymore. Okay? So when you're in that place of lack, it causes you to cry out to God. What I do believe God does do is capitalize on that. Okay? Because he's for you. He wants relationship with you. If you want to dance this dance, he's going to dance it so that as long as there's breath in your mouth, you have the opportunity to turn to him. Okay? So let's continue. It says in verse 36, nevertheless, they flattered him with their mouth, and they lied to him with their tongue, for their heart was not steadfast with him, nor were they faithful in his covenant. So we see that we can't really pull the wool over God's eyes. We see that when we cry out to God in our struggle and in our desperation, okay, because we've walked away from him and things get bad, we see that God is very aware of how sincere that is. If you're just asking him to get you out, and the minute you get out, you're going to go your own way and do the same stuff again. Okay? But we see the character of God in that he does still rescue them and continues to dance this dance with them. And by default with us. In verse 38, it says, but he, and this is the character of God, but he, meaning God, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and did not destroy them. He had every right to be like, this is ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? Forget y'all then. Moses, come here. I'll start a new line with you. Joshua and Caleb, you're faithful. You followed me wholly with your whole heart. You were the only two spies that came back with the confidence that even though there are giants in the land, I can give you the land the same way I took you out of Egypt. I can give you this land. And I'm going to do what I said I would do. Let me start over with you. Even though God was in his full rights to do that. And even before that, when he brought the flood, God could have just been like, forget all of them. I'm going to destroy the world with a flood. Forget the ark. I'm just going to start over. I'll make a new Adam. I'll make a new Eve. You know what I'm saying? But he didn't do that, even though he was well within his rights to do that. Why? Because this is who God is. He's full of compassion. Okay? Excuse me. Okay? It says, but he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and did not destroy them. God is for you. Okay? It says, yes, many a time he turned his anger away and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a breath that passes away and does not come again. How often they provoked him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. Yes, again and again they tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power, the day when he redeemed them from the enemy, when he worked his signs in Egypt and his wonders in the field of Zon, turned their rivers into blood and their streams that they could not drink. He sent swarms of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He also gave their crops to caterpillar, and their labor to the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. This is what God did to Egypt to take Israel out of freedom. This is the supernatural deliverance that he gave them. And now they're in the wilderness talking about he gave water. He's given us this manna, but can he give us meat? Verse 48, he also gave up their cattle to the hail and their flock to fiery lightning. He cast on them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, indignation, and trouble by sending angels of destruction among them. He made a path for his anger. He did not spare their soul from death, but gave their life over to the plague. And he destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt, the first of their strength in the tents of Ham. But he made his own people. This is God's careful care of Israel, which they have forgotten. But he made his own people go forth like sheep, and God guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they did not fear. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to his holy border, the mountain which his right hand had acquired. He also drove out the nations before them, allotted them an inheritance by survey, and made the tribes of Israel dwell in their tents. Yet they tested and provoked the Most High God, and did not keep his testimonies, but turned back and acted unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their carved images. Meaning, God is not sharing, you guys. He doesn't share worship. He's described as a jealous God in the sense that he's not okay when you find him on your own terms. This is my faith. This is what my experience has taught me. This is how I need to see God. And this is how I need to serve God. And it's right in my own eyes. And so God's accepting that. God's not accepting that. That's like my husband knowing that I hate. What do I hate? What is there that I hate? And now I'm drawing a blank, like I love everything. What food do I really dislike? Wow, I'm really drawing a blank. What do I hate? I'll give a simple thing because my taste buds have changed. I really don't enjoy sweet coffee anymore, or any kind of sweet coffee drink. If it's chocolate and it's sweet, or any other flavor and it's sweet, I enjoy. It's not that I don't like sugar, but I just don't like sweet coffee anymore. I like to taste the coffee. I like the bitter flavor of coffee. And so that's like my husband knowing that I don't like sweet coffee, and he's trying to surprise me. And I don't know, maybe he's trying to show me he loves me, and he goes out for coffee and he brings me sweet coffee. That's not if you know me, you'll know that I don't like sweet coffee though. So I appreciate the gesture. I appreciate that you went out and tried to get me something, but I'm not accepting it because I don't drink sweet coffee. So why, you shouldn't expect me to enjoy sweet coffee just because that's what you wanted to bring me. Because if you knew me, you would know that I don't like sweet coffee. So I'm not going to be mad at you for the sweet coffee, but I'm not going to enjoy the sweet coffee. And I'm not going to drink the sweet coffee because I don't like sweet coffee. You understand what I'm saying? And that's a really simple example, but maybe that's for the best to kind of help you make the parallel. Okay. So where was I? So I was reading verse 58. For they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their carved images. Verse 59. When God heard this, he was furious and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hands. So this is, they wanted to be like the other nations. They wanted to follow the other nations. It's like God's like, okay, go then. Go. You can't stay here like this because I'm not accepting that sweet coffee. If all you're going to bring me is sweet coffee, then go. Okay? And so, and it says, and his glory into the enemy's hands. Verse 62. He also gave his people over to the sword and was furious with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given in marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awoke as from a sleep, like a mighty man who shouts because of wine, and he beat back his enemies. He put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah. So it's like God was in the midst of all of this with this dance and back and forth, judgment and all of that. Okay. But once and for all, we see that God has decided, all right, I'm going to fix this thing. I'm going to do what needs to be done. Okay? And to me, this ties the Old Testament to the New Testament. They're weak. They can only dance this dance with me. But I'm for them. I really want them. I want relationship with them. I'm going to do what needs to be done. Okay? My righteous plan is coming through Israel. I've got these tribes that I'm working with. Based on conventional wisdom, Reuben is the firstborn. Salvation should have come through him, but we had to deal with a lot of issues with Reuben. Okay? His character was revealed when he uncovered his father's nakedness. I think he took one of his father's concubines or wives, and that's a no-no. Your son can't do that even after you're gone. You know what I'm saying? And so, well, I think he was still alive when he did it too, which made it even worse. But anyway, moving on. And so, I'm not going to do this plan the way man would work this plan out, because I'm judging this whole situation through righteousness. Okay? So here we begin to see the shift. Okay? The dance will continue to be danced, but God has a plan that's set into motion, that's culminated in what Jesus does. Okay? And it starts here. Okay? In verse 68, it says, but chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth which he has established forever. He also chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfold. So he's choosing the tribe of Judah. David is from the tribe of Judah. You know, he's saying salvation to end this dance is coming out of the tribe of Judah. And if you read the Bible, you know that Jesus is a descendant of David out of the tribe of Judah. So in this passage, the buck stops here to talk about what God will do through David. But we can come to understand that it's ultimately what God does about this dance through Jesus. Okay, so let's finish reading it. It says, moreover, let's start back for verse 67. So it says, moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth which he has established forever. He also chose David his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, and from following the ewes that had young he brought him. Oh, from following the ewes that had young he brought him to shepherd Jacob his people. So in other words, God took him away from his job of taking care of sheep, even sheep with young lambs that he needed to take extra care of. He took him from a very delicate and sensitive and important job so that he could come and continue to be a shepherd, but be a shepherd for Israel. And we know that Jesus is described as the good shepherd. So it's the same kind of relationship. So to shepherd Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. And to me, the overwhelming message in this is, God made the decision because he's for us. And we're not going to do this thing on our own. It's almost like he's chosen to shepherd us to be able to do this thing, to be able to follow him, to be able to stay under his protection. And it just reveals that God is for us. He's for us. He's not against us. And the adversity comes, okay, because of sin. The adversity happens because of sin. Wow. 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 Harpo Polo, hey, long time no see. It's good to see you. She said, good morning, Natasha. Good morning. So you are not out there. I'm looking at the chat, y'all. You are not out there with the Good Friday sales, or maybe you are. Good morning. Good morning. So we're at the live chat portion of this study. So if you guys usually, I come down here, I scroll down the live chat, and if I don't see anybody, I think, well, I guess nobody has anything to say, and I go on about my day. But today I do have the time to slow it down a little bit since everybody in my house is still sleeping. So if you do have something you want to say, or you want to say hey, or you have a question or a comment, do leave it in the chat, because we're at the chat portion of this study. And it does say that some of y'all are out here watching. So if you're out here watching and you have something to say hey, okay? But you guys, I'm just really encouraged by this, and I hope that you guys are encouraged by this also. Because, and I think I've shared this in a live previously, that, a lot of my process this year has been to see God as he is, instead of to see him according to the assumptions that I have about him. I know you guys know what that's like, because I've seen a lot of people do videos on YouTube about our assumptions about them based on the videos that they make, not necessarily based on the facts that are in their lives. We make a lot of assumptions about people, and I've made a lot of assumptions about God, and I've really been enjoying, really closely examining those assumptions and starting to walk in truth and letting go of the ones that are just not accurate. They're just not true. It's just not who God is. And one of the number one things for me is just the knowledge that God is for me. God is for us. He's not up there all disgusted, shaking his head every time you trip up, like, shaking his head in disgust and not even wanting to come near you because you're just so filthy. I remember reading about the life of Jesus, and, not long after reading about the law of Moses and how they felt about being unclean, and how a leper was considered so unclean, and that they even had to live in their own separate communities because, the people considered that illness to be really contagious. I think in modern times they've come to realize leprosy is not as contagious as you might expect. But back then, that, leprosy, it was like a living death. Like your body just rots and falls off of you slowly over time. And, they really considered those people to be unclean, and blood was unclean. Some blood was, like if you had some kind of emission of blood, or when a woman was on her period, or if she had some kind of, constant bleeding, this was considered unclean. And then when you go in the Gospels and you read about Jesus and you read about how he responded when he was touched, because in the Old Testament, under those laws, if you come into contact with unclean things, now you're unclean. And there's a ceremonial process you have to go through to be made clean. So you would think Jesus, who's God walking on earth, you know what I'm saying? You would think that if those unclean things came into contact with him, that would be his focus. Or he would at least rebuke somebody like, you have leprosy. Why are you in my face? Or, why are you touching me? Or you would certainly not expect him to touch them. The woman with the issue of blood who touched him, she was unclean. So technically touching him should have made him unclean. But he came for that purpose. He came so that he could take everything that makes us unclean onto himself so that we could be clean. So it was really interesting to see him walk that out even before he went to the cross. He touched lepers and healed them. He let people touch him that were unclean. He didn't rebuke the woman with the issue of blood when he was on his way to heal, an important person's daughter who was on her deathbed. And she's delaying the process with her issue, by touching him when she's not even supposed to be in a crowd because she's been bleeding for, I think it's for 10 plus years or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But he never said, why are you touching me? You're unclean. Because he was there for that exact same purpose. You know what I'm saying? He assumes that onto himself. And that's the solution for our uncleanliness. That's the solution for everything that's broken within us. We give those things to Jesus and he makes us whole. And he makes us clean. It's so powerful. It's so powerful. All right, you guys. I hope that you guys have a blessed day because I don't see anything further in the chat. I hope that you guys have a blessed day. I will see you in the next live. So be blessed. Don't get dizzy.